welcome to CounterPunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners, viewers, thank you so much. As always, it is the fun drive. It is the time where we ask about, are you interested? Are you willing? Are you able to support Counterpunch when Counterpunch really needs that support financially? I don't know if you've seen the most recent developments, but Counterpunch has been targeted, been attacked. A DDoS or whatever it is that they call that. Counterpunch's website has been targeted by unknown actors, and I think we all understand why. It is because Counterpunch publishes the kind of analysis that you all know about, the kinds of things that you've depended on for 30 plus years. So here's the deal. Counterpunch needs you. I don't know why I said here's the deal, like I'm like Joe Biden or some nonsense. So Counterpunch is asking for you guys to support. Counterpunch needs that. Counterpunch appreciates that. The way I'm speaking about Counterpunch is weird, so I'm just going to segue from that into talking about my guest. Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt is with me today. Rebecca is an artist and cultural worker currently pursuing her doctorate at Hiroshima City University in Japan. She is a program director for the Queer Mikvah Project. She is also the author of a very important article in Counterpunch just the other day. This is Genocide, all out to end the war on Gaza. You can follow her on Instagram at Big, Big, Big Things. Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt, welcome to Counterpunch Radio.
Thanks so much, Eric. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning from Japan.
So I guess you've already segued us into the question. Tell us about yourself, a little bit background, how you became engaged in peace activism, Palestine solidarity work, and how the heck you ended up in Japan.
Sure, yeah. Thanks so much, Eric, and to everyone at CounterPunch for the work that you guys are doing to get information out about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Well, my name's Rebecca. I grew up in Chicago, but I was born in Arizona. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and my parents are both kind of from Chicago. My father was actually born in Haifa. His parents are German Jews who left Nazi Germany to go to Palestine during the war, and they met there. And my mom's side of the family is actually from the Philippines, and they left in the kind of early 1900s, 1950s to come to Chicago, and my mom was born in Chicago. So my parents actually both met in Chicago, but my father was born in Haifa. My mother was born there. And I grew up there. I was born in Phoenix, but I grew up in Chicago. And yeah, I went to a Jewish school, Jewish day school, as they call it. And we grew up with all the Jewish values of all the Jewish holidays, all of the, weekends going to synagogue sometimes, but basically just, it was a very American Jewish education. That was very important to my father and his parents, that we were educated in our music, in our songs, in our prayers, in our culture. And that also necessitated support of the state of Israel because, my father was born there. My grandparents had basically fled there and helped with the establishment, or were there and part of the establishment of the state. And so it was important that we had, a good Jewish education, which I think was important. And I feel very grateful for the education that I did have, because it was very critical, very arts focused. And it wasn't, it was, I think, well-rounded. And let me just say, it was important that we were educated in this way growing up in Chicago. And at the same time, there was just a lot of other stuff that came in with that education, which includes Zionism. And so, yeah, I think when I went to high school, I also do want to say, I grew up in that school being one of the very few brown people, because I was mixed. I was Filipino and Jewish. There were a couple of other Asian Jewish people, but it was mostly Ashkenazi, white passing, white looking Jews. And I was on a scholarship. And so we were definitely sort of like a different family. And there was also a lot of weird stuff around that I won't get into. But I do think that growing up in that experience and then leaving and then going to a high school that was an extremely diverse, big high school, Lincoln Park High School in Chicago, that was like a very shocking experience for me, going from a small white Ashkenazi Jewish community into an extremely diverse, big, inner city Chicago high school. And I think it was really in high school that I started to kind of like question what that was all about, what the whole the conversations were in grade school. And then also I forgot to mention that we did go to Israel. It was 2000, the year 2000. We were actually the last class. They would do a trip to Israel every year, as part of the process of kind of convincing us that we should move there, or convincing us that we should live in Israel, or just convincing us that we should support monetarily or in other ways, the state. We did a lot of conversations around peace. I remember Shimon Peres. We were writing letters to Shimon Peres, and when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in the quote unquote peace process, we experienced the 90s through the lens of a Zionist Israeli school. And then, we were just praying for peace all the time as children. But we didn't obviously understand the political situation of what was really happening. So when we went there in 2000, it was also like very eye-opening for me. Of course, they take you to all of the sites. It's kind of like a mini birthright trip. For those who aren't familiar, birthright is a trip to Israel, a free trip to Israel that they give to all Jews. The Israeli government sponsors this free trip to Israel for all Jews who want to go, for young people. And up until I think age 25, you're able to do that. And so this was kind of like a mini version of that, our final school trip, to kind of encapsulate what we did in school. And so I remember going on that and just, of course, really loving it. It's a beautiful place. You're with all your friends, and really just being in that mindset of like, wow, Israel is like a beautiful place to be. And it's our home. It's our home. And that was really reiterated a lot in our upbringing. And so I want to say all that because when I got to high school and I was kind of like, I don't know, just listening to punk music and like kind of getting into more politicized. And then the Iraq War happened. I was participating in more Amnesty International stuff. I was really like, I don't know. I just didn't know how to feel about it. I just was hearing more about how Israel was like not that great, and I just was like, I can't even like handle that. I'm just gonna walk away. And then, yeah, I guess in college too, I wasn't really involved in the conversation. I didn't have that many Jewish friends. I went to school in Portland, Oregon. I didn't know that many Jewish people. And I basically just said, I don't want to deal with this. I was like, I know this was like my upbringing and my education, but I was just confused. And then I think it was 2013 that I went back to the occupied territories with my family. Like we went to, my family had a family reunion in 2013 because, of course, my father's family still has family there. Um, and I know they can't stand that I'm talking about this right now. So just FYI, I'm like, how much do I want to say? But yeah, basically we went back, and it was 2013, and I went on a tour of East Jerusalem with Ir Amim. Ir Amim is an organization that, helps, they basically work on Jerusalem issues. And so a friend who was studying to be a rabbi, who was like a radical rabbi, had recommended, hey, you should, if you're going to Jerusalem, go check out Ir Amim. So they gave us a tour of, different points in East Jerusalem where you could see the wall. At that time, the wall at certain points was still being built. And I took a lot of photos. I took it all on film. But, there were like those, the Palestinian people had put up a net to catch the trash because the Jewish people would just throw trash down into the area where they were. I remember just, yeah, the wall, the security, like all that stuff, like all of the awful things that we know to be true now. The checkpoints, of course, I didn't, because I have an Israeli passport, because my father gave me dual citizenship, I didn't go to certain places, like there's certain places I can't go, but I also do I really want to reiterate this to the listeners, that as a person who literally has nothing to do with Palestine, literally nothing to do with that place, besides the fact that my father was born there, I actually have access to go to many, many places because of that paper. That Palestinians whose families have lived there for multiple generations, they can't even go. And so it's, I mean, there's a long, I have like so many things to say, Eric, but I think the main point is, growing up, we really did have this emphasis on peace as children. That was what we were taught. And so in my process of sort of like de-Zionizing myself and getting and coming out of the thinking around like why I need to be in Israel, I really had to separate myself from my family and like really kind of distance myself from the ideology and the thinking, because yeah, it's just very pervasive in our community. Yeah.
So would you say that you were, I guess the question really is, was there a moment of realization, or was this just a subtle process over a long period of time, or is it both?
It's so funny because I was just messaging a friend of mine from grade school. She was like one of my best friends in grade school. And we're just texting. We're like, this is absolutely awful. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, I have to tell you that I remember the first time that there was a crack in that vision for me. And we were talking, and I'm not exactly sure what it was about. And I wish I could remember, and I got to go look and see if I wrote this down somewhere, but basically she just made some, she's a very sarcastic person in general, and she just made some comment like, oh well, you actually believe Israel on that one, or like something like that. And I just like it, I really remember, I think I was probably like 13 or 14 or something, and I was like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean it that we don't, like it was just like total cognitive dissonance. Like, how could you not believe that that's a real thing? And then I think, in my political education and my awakening, and many other ways, there were so many other things that built into that, like especially with Iraq. I mean, that was huge. Afghanistan and what was going on, and just understanding US imperialism in general, studying Latin America like in high school, and studying, I don't even know. I mean, I hadn't even gone into studying the Philippines at that point, but basically just, yeah, consistently being awakened to these, struggles that were tangential, human rights struggles, basically. I mean, I was really into animal rights in high school because I was an empathetic person who cared about, our food systems, and how other beings were being treated. And I think I've always been like that. And so for me, when she said that, it cracked it open. And then I think from there, everything else just kind of like helped open it a little bit more. But because, like I was saying, it was such a place of like, I just didn't really know how to deal with it. It was shameful. I was like, what do you mean? Wait, I don't get it. And then to understand that Israel was doing stuff that I didn't really like, or it was like up against the other values that I had, I just couldn't even look at it. And I think a lot of us in the American Jewish community have done that. We've been willfully ignorant. I was willfully ignorant for a long time. Yeah.
Now, were you taught that Palestinians don't really exist? That Palestinians are kind of a creation, a political creation, that they're actually Egyptians or Jordanians or Syrians or Lebanese and whatever. This is I've mentioned this many times, but this was one of the things that always really resonated with me as far as like trying to pinpoint when it was that I was able to sort of begin to unlearn a lot of things, was when I started to realize like, wow, that's not true,
Mm,
and actually let's figure out who these people are and what their history is. Oh, okay. So I want to know if you were taught that in your sort of Zionist indoctrination or whatever you want to call it. And if you weren't, how did you find the empathy
mm.
to sort of pull all of this apart?
That's a really good question. I don't think we ever heard that like explicitly. I don't recall really explicitly there being this like Palestinians are a fake people. I'm sure that's an argument. I'm sure, clearly it is because that's what you were receiving. But really, it was more like I remember there's this deep memory in my brain of just the letters PLO, and the letters PLO, like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they that phrase I think was really demonized. Like the I didn't understand. I don't even think we really talked about what it was. And then I must say then too, 2000 the year 2000 we went to Israel on our trip, right? Israel, like the state of Israel. And then in 2001 it was 9/11. And so it was this timing of like, and then it was like we had already graduated, but the next class after us, they were like, well, we're not going because terrorism. And I think it was also, we had a lot of indoctrination more into the idea that terrorism, I mean, there were all the bus bombings and all of these awful suicide bombings and stuff in the 90s. So that was everything that we were kind of like getting the secondhand hearing of secondhand stories of that. And so there was a lot of fear, just a lot of fear. We grew up with a lot of fear that someone always wanted to destroy us.
It's interesting because now that I look back at it, I do think that it's, because I have, as far as my background is very much more secular than
Mm,
yours. I didn't have any religious school. I always went to public
mm,
school. I never went to a synagogue really at all.
mm, mm.
My family comes from the Soviet Union, so they're very de-religionized or whatever. They don't have those traditions in the same way, and so. I didn't really have any of that kind of indoctrination, but it was much more political. Like many Soviet immigrants, they sort of embraced neocon politics. And I was, raised in Southern California, sort of the seat in Orange County, the seat of neocon reactionary republicanism. And, so for me, the indoctrination part was more of a political one than
Hmm.
really ever religious or cultural in some of the ways that you've been describing. So that's interesting to me.
That is very interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of different ways, I mean, Zionism is also extremely influential in the Christian community, in the evangelical, in the Christian Zionists are the biggest supporters of Palestine. I mean, they do a lot. And I'm sure that the way that it's taught in those communities is also different. It has a different flavor. It has a different, way of convincing people that, the Jews need to be in Israel. Mm.
So I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about your article that we published in CounterPunch just the other day. We're recording here on the 19th of October, at least US time. I guess it's the 20th over there.
Oh,
Um, So your article, "This is Genocide, All Out to End the War on Gaza." Can you obviously summarize it a little bit for people who are listening to us and haven't read the article? But in particular, I want to talk about the use of the word genocide
mm.
and how and why you see Israel's attack on the Palestinians, on Gaza now, but on Palestinians more broadly, as genocide.
Yeah, great question. And I think this will lead into this definition. I do want to also say that my great grandparents on my father's side, so my father's grandparents, actually died in Auschwitz. And I have my grandmother's name, Rebecca. And I think, to me, this is actually one of the things that motivates me the most in my fight as an ally for Palestinian liberation, is because I do not believe that our pain and suffering, the pain and suffering of our ancestors, not only in the European Holocaust, but before that, as people who were displaced for many generations as Jews, I believe that our pain has been co opted by a Zionist state entity, that our stories are being used to give us a sense of unending fear. And because we have that fear, we feel the necessity to build a wall around ourselves and create a sense of false security for ourselves with surveillance technology and our military and sending all our children to be in the military. And I'm speaking as a person who has an Israeli passport, but I did not grow up in Israel. So that's very different. I'm sure there are people from Israel who have very different experience than I do. But from the American perspective, as a Jewish American, as a Jewish person of color, as a Filipino person who also understands, colonialism and repeat colonizations, and also murder and war from multiple different entities, state entities. I believe that what's happening and has been happening for the past 75 years in Israel is a slow genocide. It's an intentional erasure of people who are of a place in order to take their land and resources. And I think that the Jewish story, the Jewish histories, our Jewish ancestral histories, and the memories of our ancestors have been stolen and used to justify the murder of Palestinian people for 75 years. And I refuse, as a Jewish person and as a Holocaust descendant, to allow that to happen. We say, not in my name, not in our name. And yeah, it took me a long time to get to this place. I'm 36 years old, but I think everything that I've learned along the way has helped me better understand having empathy for other human beings, and really needing, I mean, this is a bigger question of just decrying war in general and decrying weapons production in general, especially nuclear. And again, I'm speaking from Hiroshima, so it's important for me to speak to the idea of nuclear destruction, because I'm speaking from the epicenter of that destruction. Weapons now, technology, we're in a totally different ballgame as we were in 1945, or even before that, when or even 48, let's just say 48, when the state was created. We're in a totally different realm. And I just really, really believe that all people deserve a place to feel safe, and that our safety does not depend on weapons. Our safety does not depend on nuclear weapons. It doesn't depend on surveillance weapons. It doesn't depend on automated machine guns mounted on a checkpoint. It depends on actual peacemaking and actual communication and actual community building, like people lived in Palestine, Jews and Muslim people and Arab people, for generations before this. So this is a new phenomenon for the region. I'm not saying that there haven't been conflicts or wars or whatever before that, but there have been times of peace in the region, of communal living. And we know this from people who've passed that information down to us, but the blinders have been put on us so the big blinders of Zionism have really been guiding all of us in this particular way. And I'm just really urging, especially the people who are Jewish who are listening, to really dig into those stories and understand what is our relation to this place and what responsibility we have to it. Because going back to this idea of genocide is an explicit erasure of people. I think a lot of people think a genocide is like a mass murder of people. It's numbers. It's a numbers game. Like, it's got to be over 5 or 6 zeros at the end of at the end of the number for it to like qualify. But really, what it is, it's a racist, colonialist, imperialist, patriarchal method of removing people from a place and stealing their land and resources and water and other things, culture even. And so, I think it's really hard to say that. A lot of people don't like that I say that. That's why we're getting cyber attacked, And I think specifically, speaking from Japan, there's just there's a lot of questioning even here. There's a lot of empathy in Japan for what's happening in Palestine, but at the same time, people are very scared to say the truth. And I think from all angles, everyone is scared to say what this really is. But to me, like the intentional injuring of people, the disabling of people, the limiting of people's access to water, poisoning wells, the uprooting of 1 million olive trees. If people are not aware of this, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, uproot ancient olive trees. This is actually against Jewish law. There's a law in Judaism that says even in times of war, you do not destroy a fruit tree. And the fact that, they are uprooting trees because they know that the Palestinian people, are so deeply connected um, to their groves, that the olive is the epicenter of the ecological, social relations and culture of this region. That if they destroy the trees, this is a whole other, question. But if we're just looking at this from an ecological perspective, and we don't want to think about humans because we don't know how we feel about the human situation, this is an ecological disaster that has been wrought upon the place in terms of water, in terms of trees, the quote unquote, making the desert bloom situation, the constant construction. I mean, there's many, many reasons in ecological analysis as to why this is disastrous and genocidal. So it's important to say that too.
There's never been a genocide without the accompanying dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the most critical, I think, elements of all of this. It's one of the ones that I try to highlight when I talk about it, is the fact that Palestinians are subhumans
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
eyes of a sort of a hardened Zionist outlook, where they not only are they not deserving of a state, they're not deserving of rights that would belong to any other human being. And that, again, I mean, I don't want to harp on the same point, but that ties into this idea that they don't exist as well, right?
Yes.
Politically, the idea of undermining Palestinians' very existence means that you can negate their rights in all forms, right? So I think that this is also a part of this dynamic that needs to be understood.
Yes, thank you. And that's probably the key element of it. And especially we're seeing that right now with the media and calling them human animals and calling the Palestinian people, all the different tropes of BS that we've seen operate. I mean, that's exactly what they called us. That's exactly what they called the Jewish people in Europe when they were trying to liquidate the Jewish people, and it's really truly a tragedy that our ancestors' experiences of this exact situation have been manipulated, and the fear and anger and shame around what happened to us has been manipulated into believing the same thing about other people. And I just want to speak as a Jewish person to say that that is not what we stand for. And yeah, we refuse to allow that to happen again to anyone, including the Palestinian people.
Well, and also the political understanding is key. And it took me a long time as well, because, of course, they don't teach any of these kinds of things in college. They teach you all kinds of bullshit, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, it really took me a long time to really understand that Zionism is actually the most reactionary political current of Jewish life of the early 20th century, that it was the one that won out because it served the interests of imperialism, and that there were very concrete historical reasons for why this all happened in the way that it did, including the collapse of the Jewish left and its sort of amalgamation in the Soviet period. Anyway, I don't have time for all that. But the point being that Zionism is a reactionary colonial sort of framework, ultra sort of, I don't want to say ultra, but nationalist and reactionary to its core. And in understanding it that way, we also understand the progression from 1948 to now, where it's no longer just a reactionary nationalist colonialist outlook. The state of Israel is fully fascist. It
Yeah,
has
yeah,
fully morphed into a fascist state with a fascist political culture and a fascist social dynamic. And that includes the mainstreaming of the various ultra right wing Nazi Israeli forces, that includes the sort of complete marginalization of anything resembling the left. When you were in Israel in 2000, even in 2000, 23 years ago, it's vastly different politically now. So I think we should also talk a little bit about the evolution of Israel and what that means for understanding of this genocide.
I think that's a really important point. And, in the past, I want to say 3 to 4 or 5 years, I've been more involved with Jewish Voice for Peace. And they are very, very active in the American Jewish community in really sounding the alarm consistently about what's happening in Palestine. And I feel like without them, I wouldn't have had this kind of education at all, because they're all such principled peacemakers and have been in this struggle for since the 90s. But I do think that the most recent developments, and if you guys have been following what's been happening in Israel with the protests and the collapse and the judicial reforms and the, again, like you're saying, these awful, just fascist, right wing, extreme, religious extremists. Um, I don't even want to say their names, but we know who they are. Like these people who are have taken the leadership, basically taken the helm of this place, and are just going all out in the wrong way. And this is why we're in this situation, because the political development into what this is right now has been so drastic and very quick, very fast. And again, it's slow, but just in the past couple of years, I mean, again, this year was already the deadliest year for Palestinians. In the past couple of years, there's so much factual information that just indicates, again, more the increase of settlers occupying homes, the increase of more armed settler groups just roaming and harassing Palestinians, which they've done for years already now. But those kinds of incidents are just increasing the reports of, people just being harassed, and their land being actively stolen, their homes being actively invaded, and people getting kicked out. I think because of the internet, people have been a little bit more aware of this kind of process that's been going on for a long time. But now that we're in this situation where, and then of course we cannot forget that the US is backing all of this. And so it's just such a fucking mess and a disaster. It's like hard to even begin, like where you start with it. But I do believe that we saw it coming. We saw it coming. People have been talking about this. Everyone has known that this has been happening, regardless. I mean, this has been happening for so long, and people have been speaking about this for so long, and people have been consistently silenced. UN, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem. We have so many reports that this is an apartheid state. It's confirmed. Even before the reports, it was confirmed. There are so many, like, I don't know what it's going to take the international community to act or move on giving some kind of, you know, to, I don't even want to say punishment. I just want to say, like, how has this not been shut down already? And we know why. It's because the United States has interest in the region. It's an important, basically, nuclear military base for the United States. And if who can challenge that? Basically, I mean, we've seen them veto all of the UN motions to do anything, and everyone's basically handcuffed in this situation. And that's why I said in my article that we have been taken, all of us have been taken hostage. We've all been taken hostage by this situation, because as much as we're screaming and demanding something to happen, it's like these larger powers, the larger imperialist, corporate, nuclear weapons industry that needs that area for what they do. And again, I also want to say that when I lived in the U.S.-Mexico border. I lived in Tijuana for 3 years, and so I have the experience of living in a border, border town, of working in one side and going back to the other side, and moving and going through checkpoints and sitting in the borderline. And I lived with people who had to go to school and cross the border to go to school every day. And the experience of living in a hyper surveilled area that is a militarized border checkpoint is extremely traumatizing. I mean, I was only there for a few years, but imagine the people who have to grow up in these environments. And guess what? All of those borders are just, Palestine is a testing area for all of the weapons that get used all over the world in all of our wars. All of the wars that America perpetuates, and Britain and France and, all of the Western powers are consistently instigating. Palestine is the testing ground for these weapons, and that includes border security, surveillance, cameras, all of those things. And this is why no one wants us to say this shit, is because once people understand what these quote unquote conflicts are, we've been seeing again all of the Raytheon, Boeing, all of the stocks are going up right now because people are confirming that the weapons are working in the ways that we want them to. And to me, that is such, I have no words. I have no words for what we've seen this week. I mean, it's been horrifying. And if you're not horrified, I'm not sure who you are as a human being. Yeah.
We will leave it there. That's beautifully said. Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt has been with us today. The article we've been talking about, This is Genocide, All Out to End the War on Gaza, that's in CounterPunch. You can follow her on Instagram at Big, Big, Big Things. That's three bigs, okay? Don't you dare try two bigs. It's three bigs.
Three
Big,
people.
big, big, big things. All right. Maybe I just said it four times. Who
Eh.
knows? All right. All right, everyone. Thank you as always, and we will chat again very, very soon.